Welcome. I'm Shelly O'Neal from the Green Velvet Couch, and I'm a therapist, a wellness coach, and certified corporate wellness specialist. On this podcast, I have the honor of talking to people who will be sharing their inspiring stories about how they've overcome obstacles to really live their life to the fullest. Hopefully, you'll leave the podcast being challenged, informed, and sharing a few laughs as we talk about hard things in a relaxing and fun manner. And as the owner of a 100-plus employee healthcare company, I know firsthand that corporate wellness is personal wellness. Thank you for joining me on the Green Velvet Couch today. I'm honored to have here with me Teresa Bailey. She's the president of Waddell and Associates in Nashville, and she has over 17 years of experience in the finance industry. That's a lot of experience. She's also been featured on CNBC, NBC, and in the American City Business Journals. And she's a passionate advocate for women entering the financial planning field, which I think is absolutely magnificent. She's also a thought leader in this ever-changing financial landscape. And who are we kidding? Has it really changed a lot, even in the last couple of years? She has a specific passion surrounding the evolution of financial services and its approach to women, entrepreneurs, and creatives. So, Teresa, I'm so excited for this conversation about the connection between emotional and financial health. So we have a lot of stuff to cover. So I want to welcome you, but I want to jump right in. So tell me, when was like the moment or the time frame that you really connected psychology and wealth management?
Oh my goodness. Well, first, let me say thank you for having me on today. I'm really excited to talk about this. I spend so much time talking about numbers as a way to explain what I do. But you're going to have a conversation with me today that really gets to the heart of the majority of what I do when I talk to people about money and finances. And to answer your question, it was probably on like day 3 of my career in wealth management that I realized
Fast.
that the running the simulations, doing the planning, and coming up with the answer was a very small part of the service that was really needed for the individual. So I noticed that very prudent advice would be given, but then, the client wouldn't take action on it. And that I just found so curious. So that probably very early on sparked my interest in why people generally do what we do, but why we don't always make the best decisions around money and our lives in general.
I think that's so intriguing, and I really want to learn more about that, like why we don't do the things that we need to be doing and how it does relate to our mental health. So right out of the gate, then you made that connection. Hey, financial health is correlated very closely with mental health or your emotional health.
Oh, absolutely. I think you can generalize men versus women. I think there are commonalities in each gender when we approach money. I could see patterns forming, specifically around maybe some insecurities that had snowballed into maybe a little bit of mental health instability. And then for quite a few clients, I think I started to notice in sort of the older generations that when their nutrition changed, their mental health was changing and their ability to make wise choices was changing too. And then you look to the younger generations, just having children, their lack of sleep is changing. Mm-hmm. The lack of sleep is entering into their lives. Their ability to make wise decisions is changing. So I think there's just a basket of things that can cause us to lose the way of our financial health when our mental health becomes a little bit, on shaky ground.
And I love that that's a very holistic approach. And as a therapist and a wellness consultant, I just love working with companies and organizations and small businesses and how to help them come up with ways to keep their employees healthy, because healthy people don't just show up, they're developed. But looking at the 4 pillars of wellness is kind of what I've termed it, where you have to be healthy emotionally, spiritually, physically. You're talking about that as well. And then financially. When I've worked with people who we've been able to address and see their depression and their anxiety improve, but maybe they were still facing foreclosure. So there was a lot of shame
and embarrassment and grief, or people that are going through a relationship that's ended or a divorce and really grieving for that relationship, but having to make very difficult financial decisions moving forward.
Those transitional moments in life are almost impossible to make wise choices through if you don't either have a strong emotional foundation or you don't have a relationship with a counselor or therapist or someone who can walk you through those moments. A lot of discussion in my industry with my peers and colleagues is how little training in psychology we receive, but so much of what we do is leading and guiding through those, we call them transitional situations. You're divorcing or someone in your family has passed away. There's so much educational material that exists out there to help people with their financial literacy, financial confidence. I find that it's really all about getting someone to slow down, step out of the anxiety in order to be able to concentrate, to find the path forward. There's always a solution. But if you really are stuck in a spiral of either depression or anxiety, you really need to get a partner that can help you walk through it.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important for those of us that are trying to make those decisions to know that it's okay to have help, to have someone else, especially like you said, during those transitional times. And, I've had families who had a child that was going to need chronic care or chronic services, or all of a sudden they were caregiving for a parent and their ability to work was reduced.
Yeah.
So a lot of things like that as well. And I think what you're saying is there's a lot of information out there that we may not be aware of to help guide us through that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you see this in the work that you do. You can have a tendency to get tunnel vision when you're in one of the types of situations that we're talking about. And even if the answer was right in front of you in a book or on a website, your ability to really connect with it and apply it to your situation is greatly reduced.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that is not often talked about financial literacy and working on a financial plan is the earlier that you can start out to really get a grasp of your own financial situation and understand financial concept. When you do hit a point in your life where you lose that mental health foundation, you have some background knowledge, something to fall back on to help you sort of seek out some resources and find somebody that can help you pull everything together. So early financial literacy is super important in this conversation as well. Waiting until you're in a trauma moment or you're in something that's very world altering. It's just a lot to ask somebody. At that point, you're just trusting the professional advice that you're getting while you're working through your own emotional process.
Exactly. And then I think you're not reacting, which is what most of us want to do. We want to be reactive versus proactive. And I remember starting my business and talking to banks, and they weren't interested. They weren't interested in my business. They weren't interested in my business plan. So I know what that feels like to have a lot of doors closed.
Yeah.
And I want you to talk a little bit about, as a woman in business in a male dominated industry, what are some of the challenges that either you faced or you have seen female clients face?
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching the Barbie movie this weekend with a friend, and I
Do you
don't know if
recommend
you've
it?
seen it.
I haven't seen it yet, so do you recommend it? I have not seen it.
I do. I think it's a very artistic expression of what women face, especially in a male dominated industry. A lot of times it can feel like it's a gaslighting situation, like you're experiencing one reality and so many of the men around you are experiencing a different reality because they have a different point of reference.
Mhm.
So, you see what you believe. So we have this very different path women do with money and business than men have had. They've been widely accepted into the world of business for eons, where women really have sort of trickled in, we sometimes had to almost fight each other for the few positions that were available in the business world, which created conflict and situations among men or women that men then sort of formed an opinion about women on. So I thought the movie did a really good job changing the lens, sort of showing life through. Remember the movie Freaky Friday where the mother and the daughter switch? It's a
Yes.
little bit of what the Barbie movie
Okay.
did. You kind of switch places. So I was watching it with a friend this weekend, a gentleman, and we had a great conversation afterwards about the things that women have to navigate that men completely have never considered, nor have they thought about. And the biggest one for me in this field is it's taken me probably 15 years to really understand and research the history of women and property ownership, all the way from England. And when many of our ancestors built this nation, women really weren't allowed to directly own assets. If they were, it was in trust and it was overseen by one of their male family members. And we really only broke free from that. This is actually the 50th anniversary of the Fair Credit Act that gave women the absolute right to have a credit card in our own name. And so that's only 50 years
Wow.
of us really being empowered
Ooh.
to make our own decisions. And now all of a sudden, within the next 6 or 7 years, we're on track to control the majority of the investable wealth in this country.
What a change very quickly then. So it's only
So
been 50 years, and then in the last 6 or 7, huge strides.
And so all of the years before that, subconsciously or maybe even directly, we were told that we weren't smart enough, or we weren't, all the things that we would have made up about ourselves. So now we suddenly have to figure it out on our own. We don't have generations of women that have shown us how a woman would approach wealth management. This whole industry was created by men for men. So for me, I find myself often reworking how I look at something because it just doesn't fit who I am. How I do my financial planning presentations is very different than my male counterparts. They just think about a balance sheet in a very different way than I do. So wealth management is a wonderful industry. It's been a great place for me, but I have often had to find my own way because of that.
I think that's encouraging. I think it's encouraging to all entrepreneurs, and especially female entrepreneurs, to hear you say, I had to find my own way. I had to find what fit for me, what worked for me. And it's okay if it's different, because this is my lens and this is my experience and my perspective.
That's why so many of my clients are entrepreneurs. I love the spirit of, okay, I want to do it differently. I want to look at it differently. Let's try a different approach. I love thinking outside the box. Money management, wealth management, creating money. That's a place you can be very successful.
I remember being very ill-equipped for the period. I was prepared for the days where it was a struggle. I was used to that and that sort of thing. But then when the business started changing, and now we have over 100 employees, and we started with me.
Yay, that's awesome.
So I remember the shift, and it didn't take a long time, but there was a process there. And all of a sudden, the reception that I received, both from men and women, but a lot from men, wasn't so warm in this industry. Like all of a sudden, no one gives you a lot of credence.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they're not real excited about what you're doing because you're doing well. And you're offering things like an HSA and a 401k, different financial things for your employees that a lot of particularly behavioral health isn't known for. Not that there aren't companies out there that do that, but typically it's not as easy, especially in a smaller organization, to get those benefits. So I wasn't very equipped to deal with the male dominated industry of kind of, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
and we do it differently. There wasn't a warm welcome. So a funny story, one gentleman who's no longer in business, I like to add that, told me, who did I think I was? I needed to stay on the porch because I couldn't run with the big dogs.
Oh my goodness.
Literally, that was the quote, which I think is hilarious. But I remember thinking, oh, I didn't know anybody needed to stay on the porch. We're in the helping profession, and there's plenty of people for all of us to help. And you don't have to trade off having a great work-life balance. You can have a good financial foundation and still help people, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was uniquely shocked to come. I was actually raised by a man. My mother passed away when I was very young. And I was invited to help out with all the things because he just couldn't manage all of it. So I was helping him with his expense reports and helping him figure out a budget. And so for me to land in this industry, I really didn't see it coming that I would not be rewarded for my innovation. It was very much, I can't tell you how many times I've, from other business professionals, especially when I was probably in my mid 20s, just very directly keep your mouth shut kind of discussions. I was just completely shocked. And then unfortunately, and I don't know how many professions this still exists in, but it did for the last 15 or 20 years in mine, the women were not really thrilled with me sort of climbing the ladder. There was a lot of resistance to that. I'd watch a male colleague walk up and say, "Hey, I need this by Wednesday." And if I tried to do that, I received criticism that I was too direct or fill in whatever adjective. That was very, very surprising to me. I think I've struggled more with navigating that dynamic than I maybe have with navigating the men. Some of the men, like stay on the porch gentlemen, they have developed that opinion over decades. So you're probably not going to change their mind. I have been very fortunate to encounter a lot of colleagues and men in this industry who were just kind of unaware. One of my favorite stories is I work around a lot of CPAs and we talk about tax deductions all the time. And I started to think about, you really can't do it anymore, but you used to be able to deduct going to the golf course as a business expense, your dues and the whole entertainment part of it. And pretty much everyone I know in Nashville who is a CPA is on the golf course on Friday. It's part of their business.
Networking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I spend a lot of time at my favorite hair salon. It's a culture there. I love it. I went gray pretty early. It takes a couple minutes to cover all that, as my daughter calls it, glitter back up once a month. But there are lovely, lovely women, business owners and executives coming through the salon as I'm there and we're talking about business. And I'll pick up a wonderful client here or there. And I started to ask the CPAs, I know, I'm like, well, why isn't this a business expense deduction? And their reaction was like shocking. Like I had just spoken another language. They couldn't fathom it. And I had to really slow walk them through, okay, you get on the golf course, you play what you're there to do. You then maybe have a drink afterwards. You're having a conversation. I really walked through each activity and compared them. And I took away any resistance because it really is the same activity, just one done in a world that's mostly male oriented. Not that women don't play golf, but mostly. And then another in a place that women find friends and fellowship in a hair salon. So I've been really blessed to be able to ask the interesting questions and slow walk folks through it. And they go, okay, well, I hadn't thought about it that way. And it still feels very unusual, but okay.
Oh, I love that example. I love that. I always think that I was very blessed to be raised around really great men. I think it served me well as a therapist. My dad had a lot of brothers who weren't that much older than me. So I don't know, there was just a lot of men and they were very healthy men. And I think that set a precedent for me of being very comfortable working with men in different industries. We do a lot for the marine industry. work with some barges and different companies and all. So I think that you can still carve out what does work for you and different things and still be in that male dominated industry, but being wise enough to be able to navigate that, like slow walking others through this. I think it's about educating people and informing them, and also just showing them that there's more than one path to success, basically.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is I really want to raise the awareness with women about what we just previously talked about, us only really being financially empowered for 50 years. I really started to notice in the women entrepreneurs I work with this interesting dynamic where we would talk about business finances, metrics, all of it. And there was this confidence and command, and they know their business.
Mhm.
Then we would move to personal financial things, investing in the stock market, their estate plan. And there was this response that kept happening, almost like a trauma response, like body language changes. There's a complete shift in the conversation, maybe an emotional sort of blank face settles in. And I just found it absolutely curious as to how women who clearly knew how to manage money, running a business, would suddenly say, "Oh, I don't know anything about money. I'm not good with
Mhm.
money."
Interesting.
Yeah, and you're looking at how can that be true that you're not good with money and you have a business that's worth $3 or $4 million?
Mhm.
How can that honestly
Mhm.
be correct? So, what I really want to work on is building that confidence back that
Mhm.
we weren't allowed to build ourselves because we couldn't really own the property that was passing through our families and we couldn't
Sure.
make the business decisions.
Right. We didn't have that opportunity. And I have been remarried for 8 years. We've been together 10, but prior to that, I was a single parent for 12 years. And there was a lot of intense emotions around finances or lack of finances.
Yeah.
And what I learned with that is there can be a lot of shame, embarrassment. So you kind of want to stay away, or the women that I remember in my life at that particular time, you kind of want to just distance yourself because you don't feel confident. You don't feel like you have the skills, the tools, or anybody that you can maybe go to because, well, I think there's a misconception about you have to have money to have someone help you through that, which is not the case at all. So I think starting back there's just so many emotional health issues playing into very logistical, strategic, practical decisions.
Oh, for sure. I think you hit the nail on the head with the shame. I think that we're mostly women walking around with this deep well of shame that we don't know more than we do. We should know more. We should have more control over this, or we should understand this more. And so I've started to do little pocket events where I can that simulate the same conversation that a group of, 5 or 6 women would have around a dinner table at a restaurant about all the other things we talk about that we're comfortable, like a ping pong ball. We'll talk about family, and then we'll talk about the new thing we saw on TikTok, and women will just run around and talk about everything, but we very rarely talk about money in those settings.
Ah,
We really don't. Nobody's saying, "Oh, did you hear that they changed the rules on the age that you have to take your required minimum distribution out of your IRA?" Like that is not something that you're going to hear. So what I really want for women is to let go of that shame, because you see it in how women have taken over technology and everything else. When we think about it from our own perspective and a different way in how it works in our lives, and we get really interested in the subject matter, we change it and we personalize it. So there's this whole world of money and financial management, financial literacy, budgeting. If more women would talk about investing and budgeting, I think it would look completely different than it looks now. I really do. I see it on Instagram and TikTok reels where women are figuring out how to like reorganize a closet, and it just looks absolutely amazing. All financial and money management is strategic thinking, and women do strategic thinking beautifully
All the
well
time. You're
all the
right.
time. We're built to do it.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you said that. I think that's exactly what needs to happen. And I love that you're so passionate about female finances and just changing, like you said, changing those conversations and instilling confidence and success in making good decisions. And I always go back to success is different for different people. The definition of wealth is different for different people. But at the end of the day, it's about financial security and choices and options versus amount of money or amount of savings or amount of whatever. So I think that's huge. So just share a little bit more about the research that you're doing on the history of female finances.
Yeah, it's what I alluded to earlier. Just I think the tipping point was I realized that we were part of coverture law for a lot longer than I understood we were. So, coverture law means that a woman is covered by her husband's legal entity. I think it even extended if you weren't married in some states to a father or a brother. But we watch historical movies and we read books and we can see the signs that that was going on, but we're not really taught in school, or there's no like real conversation that one generation is having with another of, hey, we used to have to compete for men because they held the assets, and the only way we could have financial security was to land a husband, because
Mhm.
we were very rarely were going to be able to get it on our own. And then if that husband passed away, in some states, you weren't left anything at all. Your male children were left all of the assets. And the thought was, well, if you're a good mother, they will make sure you are financially secure. That's the kind of trauma,
Yes.
right?
Faulty thinking that goes with
Yes.
that.
I mean, how much fear, if you think back in all those generations, all the things that women were trying to navigate back then just to make sure that we had the financial resources to feed our families and ourselves, care for our children. That's a lot for
Yeah.
us to dig back through. And what's especially interesting is it really did vary state by state. So if you were up in the north in the early part of this country's history, you really had very few rights to assets. It really was like the situation I just described. You know, if your husband passed away, your kids would get everything. A woman really did sort of become the legal entity of the husband, part of it. In the South, it was a little bit different because the Southerners were still trying to socially be connected to England, and they were more interested in the family estate. So it was a little bit more favorable for us women in the South, um, because we were allowed to keep our assets, but they were in a trust. Our
Okay.
husband still signed all the documents, but legally he couldn't sell away our land without our consent. Now, it's a little bit tricky. If they did it anyway, you had to find a guy to represent you in court. So it wasn't like foolproof.
Yeah.
Um, but that is never really told to us. It wasn't told to me anyway. And every
Right.
woman I bring this up to is shocked. They're like, what? And it makes me want to go back and look at, like, okay, Scarlett O'Hara, like I remember her being obsessed with her land, but I want to go back and really look at the story with this lens, like her hopping around from all the different men. Like, I just think we missed looking at a lot of our history through the lens of our own mothers, grandmothers, great grandmothers' experience with financial scarcity.
Mhm. That's just so helpful and pretty, I don't know, it expands what I'm thinking about when it comes to finances. And I think that's what needs to happen. So I'm so pleased that you shared that. Well, in wrapping up, just tell me a few things that you would recommend for good financial and emotional health and kind of step one for people?
Step one is think of your money and your finances like you do your own physical health. You know that you need to be physically active, a certain days a week or times a month for your body to get what it needs. Your finances are the same way. You really need to spend a dedicated amount of time. I work on my finances every other Sunday. That's like my day that is dedicated to going in, looking at all the transactions that have come through in my bank account, making sure that there's nothing in there that shouldn't be there, owning what I have spent. I'm guilty just like anybody else. I get on Amazon and I'm like, ooh, I need that.
Yeah.
Oh, really going through. And I used to have a category that was Amazon. I've learned that category got too large to represent anything in my life. So I have to recategorize and go back and look at what I'm spending. But you really need a clear picture on where your money is going every month. And then once you've spent some time with the you of what's going on right now, find a way to get excited about planning for future you. Much less of a chore on what do I need to save for retirement, a little bit of an emotional pivot to what do I want to do in those years, and how much should I be saving in order to be able to accomplish those goals. So find a way to get excited about saving for some future life that you'll have.
And I love how you make it just part of what you do, like your normal week. This is the time that's set aside. It's just what I need to do, just like for my physical health or my emotional health or my spiritual health, which gets back to the four pillars. So that's incredibly helpful. All right. Well, any other thoughts before we go that we need to be certain and share with our listeners?
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of on this subject is spending your money on your emotional health is important too. So make sure that you have a category for your emotional wellness now and in the future. That's a big part of, I don't use the word budget. I like to use the phrase spending plan. So make sure you have
that. Spending plan, not budget, into my vocabulary.
Who doesn't want to plan to spend their money? Like, that sounds awesome.
Yes, spending plan.
Well, thank you so much, Shelly. I appreciate the opportunity to share all this.
I have just learned so very, very much, and I'm excited. And more than that, I'm motivated in my own life to take step 1 and 2 and 3 and really achieve those goals. So, well, thank you so much for sharing your experience today with us. It's been a blast. I do want you to share with our listeners how to get in contact with you, and also so they can continue to follow your story and reach out to you if they would like to. So if you will do that, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. 2 best ways to get in touch with me: on LinkedIn, I am Teresa J.W. Bailey. Teresa without an H, so Teresa. And then my firm, Waddell and Associates, our website is wealthstrategists.com. And we have a weekly email. Subscribe to that. You'll see every time I'm featured on a show, like Shelly Show, and just our market commentary. So those 2 ways are the best ways to keep up with me.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. And listeners, now that you've learned some information and hopefully laughed a bit with us as well, now that you know, go live your best life.
Thanks so much for listening to Shelly O'Neal from the Green Velvet Couch. If you're enjoying the show, please rate, subscribe, and review where you listen to your podcast. That helps others find the show and begin their own wellness journey. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, go live your best life.